House to order. If my computer's going to cooperate. Welcome, everyone, to the Wednesday, September 15th, 2021 electronic meeting of the Ann Arbor Transportation Commission. This meeting is being held electronically to protect public health and safety due to the COVID-19 virus and to comply with orders issued by the governor, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and the County Health Department. Public comment will be via telephone only. To speak during any of the public comment opportunities, please call 206-337-9723 and enter meeting ID 938-5500-0747. Kayla, can you please call the roll?
Thanks, Molly. We have received regrets from Commissioner Dolan and Commissioner Summers, who are not able to join us this evening. Commissioner Lee and Commissioner Hadamaki will be joining late. I will now call the roll for the Transportation Commission. Commissioner Balderrama?
Here.
Commissioner Boland?
Here.
Councilmember Briggs? Absent. Commissioner Felt?
Here in Ann Arbor.
Thank you. Commissioner Hull?
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Kleinman?
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Parsons?
Here in Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Commissioner Smith? I see you on the call, Commissioner Smith. If you could unmute.
This Commissioner Smith, I'm here at mile marker 92 on the Ohio Turnpike.
All right, thank you. Drive safe. It completes our voting commissioners. For our non-voting commissioners, we have Commissioner Hess, who is not yet here, it looks like. Commissioner Hutchinson.
Here from Ann Arbor, Michigan.
Commissioner Margolis. Absent. Lieutenant Mike Sherba. Not yet here. Oh, I see Lieutenant Mike Sherba is working on getting joined in as a panelist and will be with us shortly. So I will mark Lieutenant Sherba as here. And Commissioner Stupka is absent. So we do have a quorum. I also wanted to make a quick announcement that so for all of the commissioners, I'll keep this brief because we are very time limited today. I did send an email about my role as staff liaison and the transition that will be taking place for that. And so anyone who had a chance to keep an eye on their email in the 30 minutes before this meeting has seen this news. Those who have not may feel that this is coming to you as a shock, but I am here today and probably not at your future Transportation Commission meeting, but you will be in good hands. Michelle Brainerd is on the call today. She's listening in and we're going through some training for her to fill the role of staff liaison to support this commission. So wanted to make that announcement here for you all in the event that I'm not at your next meeting. I didn't want that the chance to, I guess, say goodbye to pass by. But with that, we have a quorum and we should move along with our agenda with our limited time. So over to you, Molly.
Thank you, Kayla, and thank you so much for everything you've done for the commission over the years. We will miss you very much. So thank you. And all right, now we're going to move to public comment. This is a chance for members of the public to speak for up to 3 minutes. Please call 206-337-9723 and enter meeting ID 938-5500-0747. Do we have any public commenters today?
We do. We have caller 814. If you would like to speak during public comment, please press *9 on your phone. Yep, you're there. Okay, I marked you as allowed to speak. You will press *6 to unmute and share your comment. Phone number Oh, there you go.
Hello.
You're unmuted. Yes, we hear you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, this is Clark Cerneski from Ann Arbor. And Kayla, thank you very much for all your service over the years with this committee.
Thank you.
My comments today had to do with the Fuller Road Station proposal. If you saw the headline, Ann Arbor punished for using Amtrak, you'd be a little confused perhaps. But this could very well be the headline of an article about the recent letter from the Federal Rail Administration, Office of Infrastructure Investment, discontinuing the work on the Ann Arbor Intermodal Station project. How is the FRA punishing Ann Arborites for using Amtrak? The letter only offers a rough idea as to why the FRA came to its conclusion. Basically, the new station would cost too much because the site is constrained, thus calling for a station built over the tracks with too much parking and too large a station. Falsely claims that it would cost, quote, an order of magnitude more than other stations built in Michigan. Now, an order of magnitude is a factor of 10. For this comparison, it also does not take into account the number of passengers served or the cost of inflation. Other stations were built 10 years ago. It would be like saying that it is not right that Skyline High School costs more than Community High. Accounting for ridership and inflation, Phase 1 of the Fuller Road proposal, for example, would be similar to Phase 1 of the Dearborn station. Cost frequently cited is actually that of the full build-out, not the cost of the first phase. Full build-out only shows that moving the station to the Fuller Road site would allow that site to be viable for decades into the future, thus avoiding the need to move it again. Any additional enlargement would be triggered by need. While the FRA letter refers to the Fuller Road site as constrained, it ignores the fact that the present location, the only other viable location, is even more constrained. ETE development across the tracks from the present station limits any expansion of the Amtrak property to the north, so there's not enough space to build a parking structure to handle future passengers. Both sites would require most of its parking to be in structures. I have studied the proposed size of the station, have not found it to be too large. Placing the station over the tracks was even proposed by the organization that has been most opposed to moving the station away from its present location. In its letter, the FRA has not discussed the feasibility or estimated the cost of enlarging the Amtrak station and its facilities in its present location to meet the needs of Ann Arbor passengers decades into the future. So Ann Arborites are denied a station that meets their needs and are punished for riding the train more than other cities in Michigan. Thank you very much. It's a very complicated issue and hard to sum it up in 3 minutes. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you. We really appreciate your attention to rail travel in the region, or at least I do. Any other public commenters?
That's all. Thank you, Clark.
Great. So next we are going to move on to commission business, and Assistant City Administrator John Fournier will now present and facilitate a discussion on winter sidewalk maintenance.
Molly, before we do that, can we back up to agenda approval?
Oh no, yes, we can. Sorry, I scrolled too fast. We need to approve the consent agenda. Are there any modifications to the consent agenda? Okay. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented? Commissioner Boland, and I need a second from Valderrama. All right. All those in favor of the motion, please physically raise your hand. All those opposed? Any abstentions? All right. The consent agenda passes. Now we're going to move on to business and winter sidewalk maintenance. I was just so excited. I skipped right ahead.
Well, it's an exciting topic. Thank you, members of the commission, for having me here to talk about this issue. Staff has been working diligently over the last several months to put together the memo and do the analysis that you all received in your inbox earlier today. So rather than going through the memo line by line, I'm going to go through the PowerPoint presentation that I have. As soon as I have too many windows open, so hold on a second. Let me see if I can bring it up a different way here.
We work mostly in teams as staff, and Zoom has a little different view on the screen share. So I always struggle with that too, and finding my right window.
You're being kind, Kayla.
Well, it's true.
Okay, so let's talk about winter sidewalk maintenance. First, I'll review the resolution. As we were directed by City Council to review, assess the feasibility, and propose cost estimates and strategies for a municipal sidewalk snow removal program. And we were also asked to review the city's snow removal policies and strategies and recommend adjustments to our operational model with particular focus on crosswalks, sidewalk ramps, crossing islands, and impeding access to bus stops. The resolution asked us to address problems by zone or area in the city and asked us to identify immediate remedies that could be implemented in the winter of 21-22. It also asked us to pilot solutions, preferably along major transit corridors, and to conduct community engagement. And so we've attempted to meet those goals, but the bulk of this analysis focuses on the feasibility of various options and cost estimates associated with them. So first, let's talk a little bit about the city's baseline operations. That is what we're doing now. Right now, we focus almost all of our resources on streets. When more than 4 inches of snow falls, the city begins street plowing activities on 350 lane miles of major streets and 400 lane miles of residential streets. Before 4 inches, we'll have trucks out in advance, laying down salt or brine. Brine has been our preferred choice over the last few years, just because it's more environmentally friendly and it is also an effective application for the roadway. When we do start treating and plowing, the city prioritizes trunk lanes, major roads, school routes, hills, known trouble spots for poor driving conditions, and the next day is trash collection routes. Once those areas are clear, then we move into everything else, which is the remainder of the residential streets. Parks operations also clears about 35 miles of sidewalks in city parks and approximately 22.2 miles of other city sidewalks that are near parks, near city-owned facilities, or our other properties throughout the city. But when we start street plowing operations, Public Works usually borrows staff from parks operations to drive trucks and contribute to street clearing operations. After street clearing is done, then parks operations moves on to do the pedestrian infrastructure that they work on. When we start plowing, the city converts to 12-hour shifts during snow clearing operations and can activate a maximum of 29 staff during the day and 20 staff at night. That includes staff from parks operations, and sometimes we'll borrow staff from our signs and signals unit as well. But if they weren't street plowing, they'd be doing signs and signals work. So as part of our analysis, as I said, the resolution from City Council asked us to divide the city into four or into zones, and we decided to divide the city into 4 zones. First is the downtown or DDA district. Generally, this sidewalk clearing activity exists downtown already. It's generally provided by the Main Street Biz, the merchant associations, institutional buildings. So if you're a larger apartment building, they generally do a pretty good job of clearing their sidewalks in front of the building. And of course, individual business owners. Our general impression of downtown clearing is that for the most part, they do a decent job. However, I do, you say that and you think back immediately to the fatality that occurred downtown, and I think that that's worth noting. And so we really kept that front and center in our analysis, and we want to talk about ways to improve service downtown and make sure that doesn't happen again. And so for all of the scenarios that we provide, our recommendation downtown is to work essentially within the existing model, work with building owners and with the organizations that are clearing the sidewalk, and help improve the quality of the work that's being done downtown right now. Again, some parts of downtown have good service, some parts have decent service, but we need to be more actively organizing and working with our partners downtown to make sure that we're getting, crosswalks and curb cuts cleared in a timely manner, and making sure that our sidewalks are being cleared in a timely manner. So generally speaking, that's our recommendation for all scenarios downtown. In our major thoroughfares, we worked with AAA TA to identify thoroughfares throughout the city where bus service is its heaviest, thinking that our transit connections were very important and that we should prioritize those areas for work in our major thoroughfares. And so we identified 47 miles of sidewalks and related infrastructure along our major transit routes. In parks, as I said, parks operations focuses on plowing through paths at each city park, totaling 35 miles of plowing for each snow event. That probably more appropriately should say shoveling, but we'll call it plowing. And so what I mean by parks prioritizing through paths is that if you have a city park, they will pick a paved route that goes from one end of the park to the other, if there is one, and they will clear that specific route to make sure there's at least one through path through the park. They won't clear more than one. If there are paths that lead to park features that don't connect to a through path, they won't clear that either, but they are focusing on pedestrian connectivity in the parks, and they'll make sure that there's at least one through path in each park cleared. And then the last area are the residential sidewalks. This is the remaining 385 miles of sidewalks that aren't included in the DDA district, aren't along major thoroughfares, aren't in a park, and also aren't related to a college campus. We're kind of considering U of M's campus something separate and unto itself. U of M reports from our staff are that U of M generally does an excellent job clearing the pedestrian infrastructure on their campus. And so we've kind of left that responsibility to U of M and aren't proposing to do any city work on that infrastructure. So drilling down a little more on the major thoroughfares, this map of the city identifies them in blue. Again, working with the AAA TA, the major thoroughfares include Dexter Road, Huron Street, Industrial Highway, Miller Avenue, Packard, Pauline Boulevard, Pontiac Trail, South Main Street, Stone School Road, and Washtenaw Avenue. And the mileage of sidewalk along these thoroughfares is 47 miles. So for each of the scenarios we present, we've put together 6 different scenarios, and we have common assumptions for all of them. So each of these, they differ in terms of the ambition of the service, but where we are providing service, the level of service that we're providing is the same, if that makes sense. It'll make sense in a minute. But in each of these 6 scenarios, service starts where the city is providing service. It starts at 1 inch of snow. We model operations to have all covered pedestrian infrastructure cleared within 24 hours after the end of snowfall. We assume 25 such snow events a year. According to NOAA, Ann Arbor averages about 17 1-inch snow events every year, but it can vary between 10 and 25. And so in the interest of making sure that during a heavier snow year, our operations would be completely covered and we wouldn't be scraping around for money, we assumed 25 snow events just to make sure we can afford everything. The model includes costs for labor. equipment acquisition, operations, and maintenance. And we've shown costs over a 2-year period. And the reason why is that for some of these scenarios, we're proposing to use internal labor, which means we need to acquire a lot of equipment, which means in year one, there's a pretty big startup cost. And so we wanted to show both the year one cost and the year two cost. The year two cost would be your annual cost once you've gotten over the startup costs. And so you can kind of compare those two numbers to each other. This is what it costs to get started. This is what it costs to do the program annually every year thereafter. Plus, we have a 2-year budget cycle in Ann Arbor. And so it made sense for us to kind of stick with that idea and provide a 2-year cost. The analysis is provided without regard to budget constraints, labor market favorability, or contractor capacity, and instead we just focus on analyzing the size and scope of the programs that would be needed to meet the additional services the City Council is considering. But I do want to note there are significant budget constraints here. We do have concerns about the labor market being able to bear the demand for labor that these types of programs would demand, and we do think that there are contractor capacity issues for some of these options. And so I'll get into that when we talk about that scenario by scenario. But there are some limiting factors that we want to explore a little more and research a little more. So finally, in all scenarios, the city would need additional revenue to pay for expanded programs. We do, our budget is not in great shape. We have a deficit right now. And so I think it's, before we really get serious about pursuing one of these options, we need to really come to terms with the cost that we have. That being said, programmatically, providing this service lines up with the city's Vision Zero goals. It certainly creates a much safer pedestrian experience in the city, which is something that we take very seriously. And so it lines up with a lot of our core public policy initiatives and a lot of our core values. So I don't want members of the commission or the public to think that, we're just concerned trolling about cost and trying to poo-poo the idea. There are important benefits here that deserve to be weighed, but as we're weighing them, we should also keep in mind that we will need additional revenue to pay for these options. So without further ado, let's talk about scenario one. Generally, these scenarios are listed in terms of the least labor intensive or labor cost, and move up from there. So this would be the cheapest option that the city has that we entertained. And this one would involve the city contracting for the labor, so hiring contractors to clear the 47 miles of major streets and 35 miles of parks sidewalks. We would hire 2 supervisors somewhere in the city, whether that's in community standards or in public works or in parks operations. We would hire 2 supervisors to manage these contractors, to work with downtown stakeholders to improve plowing outcomes in the DDA, and also to support an education and enforcement campaign in the neighborhoods. And so it's very clear that in this model, we are not paying labor directly to plow or shovel or clear sidewalks or pedestrian infrastructure in the residential neighborhoods. We're investing some money in an education and enforcement campaign to try and increase compliance with our plowing ordinance. There are no capital acquisition costs because we're contracting for all the services, so we don't have to buy additional equipment. But under this model, we do have some concerns about contractor capacity, whether there are enough contractors who would bid to do this work. And we do have some collective bargaining issues. Anytime that you're putting non-union employees in the field with union employees, you have to be very sensitive to your obligations under your collective bargaining agreements. And so we'd have to have some conversations with our unions, and those uncertainties could add additional cost. And so this model works out to a year one cost of about $636,000 and a year two cost of $655,000. And that's a total 2-year cost of about $1.3 million. Option 2 is essentially the same option, only instead of doing an education and outreach campaign in the residential neighborhoods, we would attempt to contract that work as well. And so we would try to bring on contractors to do the 383 miles of neighborhood streets, the 47 miles of major streets, and 35 miles of park sidewalks. We'd still hire 2 supervisors to manage contractors and to work with the downtown stakeholders. And again, there's no capital acquisition costs, but we still have concerns about contractor capacity and our collective bargaining commitments under this option. Your total 2-year cost on this is $5.2 million. Option 3, the city hires 9 7-month temp employees. So this isn't contracted labor. Now we're talking about temp employees for 47 miles of major streets and 35 miles of park sidewalks. We still hire the 2 supervisors. They manage the temp staff, work with downtown stakeholders, and help to manage an education and enforcement campaign in the neighborhoods. We do have significant capital acquisition costs under this plan. Your startup costs are about $1.1 million for all the new equipment we would need to purchase. And we do think we have some labor market challenges with this plan. The city currently is having difficulty hiring the temp positions that we hire in public works and in other city units. And so we think we would continue to experience challenges hiring for those temp positions. And we do think there will still be some collective bargaining issues that we would need to work out with this arrangement. Something else to consider also is that if you're hiring internal labor to do this work for 25 snow events a year, they're doing snow clearing for 25 to 50 days while they're employed with the city. But for the rest of their days, they're going to have to be doing city work, doing something else. And that something else will cost money. Whether they're assigned to do solid waste work or whether they're assigned to the water unit to help us with, main breaks and infrastructure maintenance and things like that. If they're doing more work, that's going to be more parts, more equipment, more cost generally to the city. And so I can't quantify what that cost would be, but there would be very important cost additions above the $3.7 million that we're contemplating for this model. So under this model, your year 1 costs are $2.2 million. Your year 2 costs are $1.5 million for a total of 3.7. But again, collective bargaining and the cost of other work that these employees would do could drive the cost up. Number 4 is hiring full-time employees to do the 47 miles of major streets and 35 miles of park sidewalks, still hiring 2 supervisors. We still have significant capital acquisition costs. And while we eliminate our collective bargaining issues, we still think we'll have some labor market issues with this, and we will still have other costs in the city to pay for the other work that these employees will be doing. So your year 1 cost on this option is $3.4 million, and your year 2 cost is $2.7 for a full 2-year cost of a little over $6 million. Number 5, the city hires 49 7-month temp employees for 383 miles of neighborhood streets. So they would actively be shoveling and plowing those sidewalks, 47 miles of major street sidewalk work, and 35 miles of park sidewalks. We still hire 2 supervisors. They manage these employees and work with our stakeholders downtown. We have much larger capital acquisition costs for this. It's a much bigger network of sidewalks. And so your startup costs are about $4.9 million for this model. We think we'll have issues hiring that many people. And since these are temp employees, we're still potentially in collective bargaining issues. And of course, there are other costs related to the other work that they will do that I can't quantify right now, but they will have an important impact on the budget. And so your year 1 cost under this model is $8.7 million. Your year 2 cost is $5.6 million for a total 2-year cost of $14.4 million. And then the final option is kind of the soup to nuts option. The city hires 49 full-time employees to do all the residential street sidewalks, all the 47 miles of major street sidewalks, 35 miles in parks. We still hire 2 supervisors to manage staff and work with downtown stakeholders. We still have the $4.9 million in capital acquisition costs. And again, we think that there will be challenges hiring that number of people in the labor market, and it'll cause other cost increases related to the work that they would be doing. But your 2-year cost on this plan is $22 million. So it's quite a bit of money. And so our recommendations at this point, we want to obviously discuss the report with the Transportation Commission, get your feedback, incorporate that feedback into a final report that would go to City Council next month. As directed in the resolution, we think we should carry out a public engagement process to determine the community interest in the program and determine what the community would gauge as an acceptable level of cost. We'd like to carry out an RFP or an RFI process to determine if there's contractor capacity, if there's contractor interest, what that cost would be, so we can better nail down the cost of service for the contracted work. And we think that we can, go ahead and convene a working group of downtown merchants and the major institutional buildings and the biz to start talking about improving pedestrian infrastructure plowing in the downtown district. We think that's something that we can probably start doing now. And we'd like to work with the police department and community standards to build a more robust education and enforcement campaign for snow clearing in our residential neighborhoods. That likely would have to include some ordinance changes, but the kind of form of the education campaign really needs to inform the ordinance changes. So we don't have a specific recommendation on that right now, but we don't see any reason why that work couldn't get underway essentially at this point. And we also want to engage in a staff-driven study of snow clearing compliance during this winter. And what that means is either, having physical eyes on key parts of the city to determine the level of compliance with our snow clearing ordinance. Are we talking about 60% of houses that aren't plowing their sidewalks in time? Are we talking about 20%, 10%? And those numbers certainly will vary and shift depending on what part of the city you're in. And so we want to get a much better understanding of how big the problem actually is. If the problem is geographically distributed, if it's primarily caused by residences or is it businesses, and things of that nature. We kind of just need to anatomize the problem a little better so we can refine our solutions a little more. So in terms of feedback and next steps, obviously we're going to have a discussion here at the commission, or if you would like to email me with your feedback after you've had a time to read the memo and think about the presentation a little more, I'd ask for feedback before September 24th. Staff will evaluate the feedback, we'll make appropriate edits to the memo and to the presentation, and then provide those final documents to City Council and share them back with the Transportation Commission. So, we're happy to receive requests to evaluate different configurations of service. Maybe we do contractors for this or staff for that, or maybe we, focus more on an education and outreach campaign rather than a labor-driven campaign or something like that. So we can make tweaks and provide some different scenarios, make adjustments to the financial models, or provide more detail on other aspects of the report. We're happy to go back and make those kinds of changes based on your feedback. And so that's the presentation at this point. Thank you for letting me talk at you for a little bit. I'm going to stop the screen share. And if I have to reference back to the presentation, I can do that at some point in the future. But I'll stop the screen share now and hand it back over to the chair so we can facilitate a discussion.
Thank you so much. That was really useful. I know I've been eagerly awaiting details on the sidewalk snow removal. So I can just stack questions, comments, just raise your hand or use the raise hand button. But I ask if you use the button to unraise your hand after you've been called on. Commissioner Boland, and then Commissioner Felt. You're still muted.
I clicked, but I didn't click hard enough. Thanks very much for that presentation. Can you put any perspective around those dollar figures in terms of how that translates into tax increases?
So I don't have the data with me to talk about how that would translate into tax increases, but what I can tell you is that our general fund annually last year, or I guess this year for the current fiscal year, it's $114 million. And so, a $22 million increase is a significant increase in the city's budget, and hiring 49 employees would either exactly double or nearly double the size of our public works staff. And so that's a significant undertaking in terms of the resources that would need to be dedicated to that. That being said, a citywide municipal snow clearing operation is really unheard of. We surveyed, I think, 7 or 8 other cities in the country that do anything even related to it, right? No city does it everywhere. And that 22 million option has us doing it practically everywhere, right? And most cities do a program like this with contractors. And so contractor capacity is a limiting factor. And they do it just in key areas, right? In the downtown, close to cultural amenities or something of that nature. And so, it's a lot of money, but that money is also tied to a fairly ambitious and somewhat unprecedented option. Now looking at the other end of the spectrum, the 1.3 million option that's over 2 years, that's also still pretty ambitious. That would still be a pretty large program compared to other cities that are doing a sidewalk clearing operation. But we would still need additional revenue to do that, right? As I said before, we're in a deficit right now. We don't have existing funds to run a program like that. So, $1.3 million is probably, a fraction of a millage increase in the city. Or there are other ways that we could generate revenue, fees of some variety, other pricing models that we haven't explored just yet, because the revenue model that you put in place to generate $1.3 million is vastly worlds different than the one you put in place for $22 million. So it's we need a little more definition before we start looking at those things, but it is a lot of money.
Commissioner Felt, and then Commissioner Parsons.
Great, thank you very much for the presentation. I have a lot of sort of questions and perspective to offer. So, Molly, if you want to cut me off at some point, feel free. And some of that comes from being on the original Pedestrian Safety and Access Task Force that really took this on. My general question to start with, though, is perhaps the easiest, is that I'm a little bit confused about the numbers when they talk about the staffing and having to hire full-time staff for what is essentially a part-time, you never know when you'll need it job. Mm-hmm. Do the numbers reflect that full-time status or just the prorated part-time?
They reflect the full-time status. So that's total full impact to the budget, not just the time that would be dedicated to this specific clearing activity. And
that's a normal way to look at this budgetarily.
Well, if you're proposing to hire a full-time employee, we would, we would need to know what the delta of revenue is that we need to raise. So yeah, I would think that that's a normal thing to do, right? If we're we did put together a model that can tell us how much it would cost for just the time dedicated to snow clearing activity, but that doesn't help us from a budget perspective understand how much we actually need to generate in order to make the program happen.
Right. So, but looking at what to do with those people that would not just be make work for the rest of the year is certainly an important part of this. And it makes the numbers really hard to look at and figure out and understand and compare. I mean, that just sounds really difficult to me. And it's obviously why hiring a contractor is so wonderfully cheap in comparison.
Exactly.
So that's interesting. The Pedestrian Safety and Access Task Force really went after the concept of what happens just after plowing. That's one of the major issues with not having a citywide ordinance, a citywide compliance with snow clearing, is that there are blocks where you cannot get off the block because of the snow plows come by and block the crosswalks. And so we put that as a very top priority in asking the city to do something for that specifically. And so rather than looking at regions and areas, I think that might also be helpful, is to look at, if that were the priority, to clean up after the snow plows, what would change, what's possible. And also the timing aspect, that it needs to be done fairly soon, because otherwise it freezes and becomes almost an impossible task as well.
So the model presupposes return service, and that's for the contractors, and that is obviously for temp and full-time employees. We would have control over being able to send them back and have them do that service. But the cost model we put together for the contractors includes doing a first pass and then returning to that pedestrian infrastructure after plowing was done to make sure everything is cleared out. And so in any of those scenarios where we are proposing to have labor in one of those areas doing the work, we tried to model that cost of that return service to clear out the crosswalks and the curb cuts and the vineyards.
But we did really look at three things more distinctly, which is that blockage caused by snow plows, and secondly, snow being on making things less passable. And then as the immediate crisis would be ice. And so we really were looking at it from those three perspectives, rather than, we don't care if they're downtown or in a residential area or whatever. But certainly as a partially disabled walker, there are times where I cannot leave my block. And that it's that kind of concern. So I think it's a different perspective, or a different way of looking at the whole thing as well. And what they were suggesting, two members in particular who were very strong advocates, was having a dedicated machine or two that would follow up with the snow plows. And if that's all you're doing is doing this little square dance thing, it's quick, it's easy, it's cheap comparison to any of the scenarios that you put forward.
Okay.
So another way to look at it. And I didn't hear ICE mentioned at all, which does require that much more rapid response. And Snow Buddy does do ice exclusively when it's necessary. that's been an important part of what they do as well. And I guess I'm also a little bit concerned about, it doesn't sound like any of the Snow Buddy partnership ideas with public and volunteer efforts. I know it can be a legal nightmare, but that's partly what works with the Snow Buddy is of course the fact that they're doing it with volunteers from the neighborhoods. So I don't know if the staff looked at that and rejected it, that it is just too difficult legally, or what happened to that.
So we did consider what a citywide program like that would look like. And ultimately what, in our discussions, what it came down to is that we weren't sure that in every neighborhood across the city that we could have a robust volunteer program like exists with Snow Buddy. And we thought that the likelihood that those the discrepancy between neighborhoods that did have a robust volunteer effort and those that didn't might highlight some equity issues in the city really stuck with us. And we thought if we're really going to address the safety of our pedestrian infrastructure, we needed to identify options that had the city paying for labor to do it. Because we were concerned about the uneven nature of a citywide volunteer program.
That makes sense.
Commissioner Felt, I'm going to move us to the next person just so that we have time to get through. But I'd be interested to see if you have more comments or feedback. That I'd love to see it as well. I know that we can email Mr. Fournier.
Yeah, I'll follow up and I'll include 2 of the members of the task force in the process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so Commissioner Parsons and then Commissioner Balderrama.
Thank you. Thank you for the really great presentation. I really like the big picture look on these possibilities. I've got one question that I hope can be an easy answer and we can just get it into the public record and let commissioners know in terms of context, and then a follow-up that I think is going to take more time. So the quick question is, I love the detail on what our current operations are. How much does it cost? In the scenario of the sort of worst 25 events per year, if we're going to factor this in, how much does a typical road clearing, our current operations, cost the city so that we can understand percentages and what sort of, put it in context for us?
I don't have those numbers right off the top of my head, but we can render those and put them into the report. The data exists. I just don't have it in front of me.
Please do. I mean, that's really important because if this is like a 1% difference in what our current snow clearing costs is, it's a huge difference in terms of context when we're talking about that. So I'd really appreciate that follow-up.
Sure.
So the second thing I want to point out, and this is one of the points that Linda Diane made, I want to make it abundantly clear that one of the major issues we have with our current operations, which this study was meant to look at, to review our current operations, right, is the negative impacts of our current snow plowing. For instance, and I'm going to quote from the MLive article about the tragic fatality that occurred near Carytown. Quote, after stepping over a snow ridge left by a plow truck. So where are we failing in our current operations where we're doing more harm than good for pedestrians in order to accommodate vehicles? And how can we fix that? I see it all the time at Washtenaw and Huron, where the sidewalks are actually great. I mean, you asked a question about, where are the problems? Is it businesses? Is it residences? What if it's snowplow trucks in our current operations? It doesn't seem like that big of an ask to make sure that those curb ramps are cleared for all users to use. I sort of think of this like a construction project on a roadway. We don't ask the construction crew to leave and leave a mess behind. We force them to make sure that the streets are clean, that there's mitigation, there's backfill, there's grass that's planted again. We have plow trucks going through town and causing problems for pedestrians rather than solving problems. So I'm really curious, what cost would it take to take our existing infrastructure or existing operations and include that element at least to major corridors? And I can't imagine that's the big sort of sticker shock that we're seeing with some of these other, big things. That to me is something very worth pursuing. And I think a lot of people would be interested in hearing sort of what those numbers might look like and the feasibility of it.
Okay.
But again, I want to thank you for the big picture. Like, what would it take for the big municipal push, which I personally am in favor of, because sidewalks are transportation corridors. But where are we not doing things right now that we can remedy sort of in that short term as we think about this in a longer process? So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's an excellent question, and I want to just acknowledge that Linda Diane had pointed out the same thing, and we can our model focused on a full service. What does it cost to have somebody do the sidewalk and do the curb cuts and do all that? We can go back and try to put a model together that says, what if we're just doing the curb cuts and the crosswalks, and we kind of leave the sidewalks to property owners, but focus on digging out snow that might be piled up from the plows? We can separate those costs out, and I can provide that data.
But so I suppose a little follow-up question: is it current best practices for snow plows to just leave a big pile of snow in the curb ramp? That doesn't seem acceptable to me. Like, why are we going to potentially have this big new program devoted to clearing the mess that the plows have actually made? Right? It's not the initial snow event that's the problem. Often, it's the after effect of snow plows for motor vehicles.
So, the snow plows do not intentionally leave snow in the way of pedestrian infrastructure, but there is simply no other place to put it at the moment. The plow is designed to push snow off the road along the side, irrespective of what infrastructure exists there. And so, there is really no way for the plow alone, with no follow-up service, to prevent snow from being put in those locations. There has to be follow-up service to remove it. Okay. It's simply the way that the equipment is designed.
Thank you. And I do like the idea of looking at a curb cut program that focuses on those, especially for areas where we might find that the sidewalks are in pretty good shape. Commissioner Balderrama, and then Commissioner Smith.
Hi, I'm calling from Ann Arbor, Michigan, and thank you for the presentation and for listing all of these options. And I know that you mentioned that citywide municipal snow clearing option is not seen elsewhere, but I imagine since other cities do use contractors, if there's like a comparable cost to option one, just to have an idea of what like that figure could look like. And I also understand that additional staff would require additional projects and work. And is there any like projects that these could potentially look like? Was that explored in terms of like where they could fill in? And is it possible to take a look at a budget with a breakdown of employee costs as well? I know that we mentioned like collective bargaining, and so I was interested to see what kind of threshold there was.
Sure. So let me take those kind of. I think there's three questions. So let me take. So if I'm understanding you correctly, the question is, what does the most expensive option look like if it's just contractors? Is that, or what's the? So let me discuss a little bit. So that would be scenario 2 that we provided, which is doing the whole city soup to nuts with contracted labor, right? And I think that was like $5 million for your 2-year cost. So what we did to put together the cost model for contractors is we got into contact with 7 or 8 other cities in the region that are using contractors for some kind of municipal sidewalk clearing operation. And Snowbody was included in that, Grand Rapids. Gosh, I can't remember them off the top of my head, but they're listed in the memo that I provided to you. And we asked them, give us your cost breakdown and give us how many miles you're doing. And we calculated what the average cost per mile was for those cities. And the average cost per mile was something like $202.41 or something like that. And so that's how we created the cost model. And I write in the memo that there's a high elasticity on that estimate. As many of you know, things in Ann Arbor generally cost more. So, we don't know what the Ann Arbor markup might be for the contractor. We also have some unique circumstances. It was pointed out to me by our director of parks that if we're hiring a contractor to do 35 miles of park clearing, that might be a little more expensive because that's different than, say, hiring a contractor to do all the sidewalks in this neighborhood, right? With our parks, they're getting out, they're, either using equipment or shovels, they're clearing a sidewalk, and then they're getting in a car and driving to the next park. And so you've got significant transportation costs and significant time invested in that. So there are some reasons to believe that the contract cost that we calculated might be a little low. And that's why we want to do an RFP process or an RFI process to actually get, real up-to-date live estimates from our contractors to see what that cost would actually look like. So that's question one. What was question two again?
Question 2 is what would projects potentially look like? And then the follow-up was question 3 was, is it possible to take a look at a budget with the breakdown of employee costs?
Sure. And so I'm gonna do something really dangerous, which is open up the economic model and see if I can give you some numbers on the fly. And I might regret that, but I'm gonna do it anyway. So in terms of projects, it depends on where we are hiring these employees, if it's in public works or if it's in parks operations or wherever. But our public works staff are, also dedicated to our solid waste activity. So our recycling, composting, garbage. And that includes in the neighborhoods and downtown. They're involved in maintenance of a lot of our water infrastructure. And so, I had a crew digging up the street in front of my house today to replace some stormwater pipes. And so they're engaged in a lot of that work. We have some staff who are engaged in signs and signals, which is, receiving traffic control orders and printing signs and putting signs up and operating our traffic control system. And there's all kinds of things like that. And so, like I said, we did not, do a formal work plan for what these employees would work on. But when I approached our public works staff and parks ops staff and other staff and said, do you have enough work for 9 or 49 employees? They said, look, if you hire them, we've got the work for them. We've got projects that they can work on. So this isn't a make work kind of situation, as Linda Diane said. There's in the municipal landscape, everything kind of floats to City Hall and becomes our responsibility at some point. And so we think there are opportunities for these employees to work. In terms of what the cost breakdown might be, I think let's take the 400 and, if we have staff, if we hire full-time staff to do, the full thing, residential neighborhoods, major streets and everything, about $1.2 million annually would be spent just on the labor and all the costs associated for labor on snow response, and about 4.9 million would be spent overall annually just on labor, and that's in current fiscal year dollars. And so one of the reasons why there's that imbalance, you might think that seems like a proportionately a lot of money, but there are overtime costs associated with snow clearing that might not be associated with other types of activities. And so you get kind of it tends proportionately to lend itself to a larger section of the cost. Does that answer your questions?
Yeah, thank you.
You bet.
All right, Commissioner Smith, and then I think after that, we're going to have to keep moving.
I just had a question, and can wait for an answer offline. It's fine. About possibly triaging some of those options. I mean, and I apologize if I missed it as I was driving here, but is it, I understand the assumption of at 1 inch we would do it, and a citywide program includes at 1 inch and within 24 hours. Is there, and including the parks, is there a thought to, for residential, we'll wait for 2 inches, and for, we won't clear the parks, or they're the last thing to be done, if they can be done at all, and we'll get it done within 3 days of the snowfall instead of having it done within 24 hours. Because I think 1 inch and 24 hours is an excellent program, but obviously extremely expensive. Is there a way to kind of hybridize that and have a little less expensive set of options?
So there is, and that's an excellent question, is one of the things that really drives cost in this is the directive that we should be prioritizing all of our pedestrian infrastructure upfront at the same time as the streets, and we should be providing a high level of service. And so, we don't begin snow plowing, for instance, until there's 4 inches of snow on the road. And so if we change this program to say we'll provide pedestrian service at 4 inches of snow on the sidewalks, that changes the cost structure quite a bit. If we say we'll have, we'll do this in 48 hours after the snow's done falling instead of 24, that changes the cost structure quite a bit. It lowers the number of employees you need, and it lowers the number of contractors you need, and the whole 9 yards. So, we could explore those types of options if the commission would like us to, and kind of provide those as a reference point maybe for how the costs change. But the driver of cost here is the immediacy of the demand for pedestrian infrastructure clearing, and making sure that work is happening simultaneously with the street clearing operation.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I'm just going to give a couple of my own quick comments. I'm really happy to see the city looking at maintaining pedestrian infrastructure as infrastructure. And I think it's a really important shift. And I hope that regardless of what program we end up moving into, that we keep that attitude, that pedestrian infrastructure is infrastructure. You mentioned at the start that this is an important part of our Vision Zero goals. I also think it's important for our A20 goals, that if we want to be asking people to rely on our transportation systems that don't use cars, they need to work 365 days a year. So I'm really pleased that this is moving forward. I anticipate that when this comes to council, there are many more hypotheticals are going to come up, and I think it could be useful to have some more detailed scenarios beyond the ones that you presented today when that moves forward. But thank you so much. I'm excited to see this moving forward. And next up, we are going to have a presentation from Luke Liu about the Lower Town final recommendations.
Good evening, Luke Liu here. I'm a transportation engineer with the city. Tonight, joining us, we have people from OHM Advisors. They are the lead firm on the consultant team for the Lower Town Area Mobility Study. So the study started approximately near the end of 2019. It's coming around almost 2 years, and we're in the final stage of wrapping up the study. And we today here have Steve Buckland and his team member to present the alternatives proposed from the study. So they'll give the presentation. I'll be joining them in answering any questions. Steve, please.
Okay, good evening. I also have Steve Deering here. If I run into any issues, he's going to help out. Okay, I have a lot of slides, and I'm going to try to get through them pretty quick. If you miss anything as I'm buzzing through them, remember to ask me about them at the end. So we're here to talk about the alternatives and solutions for the Lower Town Area Mobility Study. Throughout this project, we've known that there's high congestion areas throughout the Lower Town area. The Lower Town area, we have Division at the southern end. We have Broadway, Plymouth, Pontiac Trail, Barton, up to DeVarn is our main area. So based on traffic modeling we've done and on observations, these are the areas that we know are high congestion intersections. So I'm going to hop right into some of the key locations and what we saw and what our recommendations are. So the Barton at Pontiac Trail, this has been brought up a number of times. There are delays in the morning heading eastbound from M14. There are delays heading westbound out of the intersection in the evening. There's also on the west leg of the intersection, there's on-street parking that has been brought up as an issue. We looked at a number of different alternatives here, whether it made sense to add east-west left turn lanes, whether it made sense to add an eastbound right turn lane, or if there was a chance to put in a mini roundabout here. Currently out there, and I think it's still out there, there's a temporary bump out, which this basically restricts the parking near the intersection. It narrows it down to a single eastbound lane. We do like that, and we do have a near, the simplest recommendation we have right now is to restrict that parking on the west leg, add bike lanes on that west leg, and keep the rest of the intersection as it is. Looking for longer term solutions where we can look to serve pedestrians, bicyclists, and vehicular traffic. We looked at changes that we could make to the signal and the potential again of a mini roundabout. Out into the future, there's a lot of new development coming north of this intersection. And what we saw with the signal or the roundabout is that there were going to be some operational issues for vehicular traffic. But ultimately, the consultant team believes that a mini roundabout would be the best option here. I do have to note that the city staff is not on board with this recommendation, but that is what we are looking at for our study. The next location we're looking at is the Broadway Beats Division, a bunch of streets coming together on the southwest end of the Broadway Bridge. In this location, there are a lot of streets, a lot of different movements, which create a lot of conflicts. In addition to that, you have Division, which is heading northbound into the intersection, and there's high speeds coming down this hill. Also, you get a lot of pedestrians through here. So what we looked at is how can we make this intersection safer, reduce the number of conflict points for pedestrians, bikes, and vehicles. And we had a few different alternatives that we looked at. One of the alternatives that we've talked a lot about, where we are not going to restrict any of the movements, is just to make improvements for the pedestrians and bikes throughout this area. Currently, when you're coming northbound on Division, the bike lane ends abruptly and the cyclist is required to just enter the traveled lane. What we'd like to do with this option is what you see in blue is continue this bike lane and then provide a buffered area as it gets into the curve section, and then brings them up onto the wider pathway across the bridge. Also in this picture, you can see the orange, which is a potential new crosswalk. Why we are putting that in the middle of the intersection, that's so people coming down Division have a better view of where the pedestrians are crossing. And this could also have a potential for a rectangular rapid flashing beacon or a hawk signal. Also in this picture up on the northwest part of it is right now as bikes or pedestrians are coming across the bridge, there's no way to get over into this bike lane that's to the west. So we're looking to widen the pathway and then make a connection for bikes to get into that. The other recommendations, like I said, we're looking to ways to restrict different movements through the intersection. We didn't come up with a consensus of which movements we'd get rid of or which roads we'd close, but there are a lot of options that we've looked at in the report. So I'm not going to get too deep into that right now, but all of them incorporate the improvements for the peds and bikes. The next intersection, Pontiac Trail at Duvar, and this is the farthest north intersection in our study. Some things to note at this intersection, you have high speeds coming in from out of town to the north. We're looking at ways to slow vehicles down coming into the community. And then also traffic's picking up in this area due to a lot of the new developments today that's just stop controlled on Duvar. So we looked at it does meet a warrant for a traffic signal, and we've also analyzed the roundabout at this location. Both work well. Ultimately, we are recommending a roundabout because that will slow traffic down coming from all directions through this intersection. Barton at the interchange at M14. We did initially start studying this, and we found that there's a lot of traffic, and we did do a signal warrant analysis and found that it did meet signal warrants. But then as the study was going on, MDOT came out with a study of their own. So we haven't pushed on any recommendations here. We're going to let that MDOT study handle the recommendations in this area. Pontiac Trail at Moore, Longshore, and then further south, you run into Swift. So on the southern legs, you have Moore, which is a northbound one-way, and then Pontiac Trail heads southbound one-way and then eventually turns into Swift. And you have Longshore coming off to the west. So this is a non-conventional intersection. It's a little bit confusing. There's gaps in the pedestrian and bike in the area. So we were looking at different alternatives to simplify this intersection. We went from very simple, just looking at pavement markings, to putting in some new islands, eliminating movements, and also looking at a roundabout option here. An option that came up later in the study was to accommodate bikes and pedestrians in this area. We're looking to yield northbound Moore traffic, yield it for all directions, add in a bike lane along that section of Moore with a buffer it through the intersection, and tie it into the existing bike lanes that are already on Pontiac Trail. The little green dots are some bollards or delineators to separate the bike lane from traffic. Our ultimate recommendation here that we think could serve best for cyclists, pedestrians, and vehicles is a roundabout. Also in this, you see Moore is shown as a two-way road. So we've analyzed it both under existing conditions, which is a one-way, and as a two-way. As I said, we looked at Moore as a two-way. Bottom left picture just shows our image from our traffic model, where we've looked at turning it into a two-lane road to see how it operates with the signal that's there. the roundabout you just saw. And then in the bottom right is a roundabout at the Maiden Pontiac or Maiden Broadway Plymouth Moore intersection. We'll get into that in a minute. Right now, we'll get into that. So overall, this is a busy intersection, a lot of traffic. We've looked at different ways to modify the signal timing to move traffic through. With the traffic we collected back in 2019, the intersection was showing to operate pretty well in our traffic models. As we go out into the future, it gets worse. We looked at both a roundabout, which in this situation, it would be a 2-lane roundabout. All the others that I've spoke of so far would just be a single lane. But we also have looked at different ways to time the signal. Because a 2-lane roundabout's not always desired, we've also looked at the signalized alternative here. All right, speed management. This has been a big focus of the study. Speed management serves all modes of travel. It best serves the bikes and the peds to make getting around safer. So the noted corridors with high speeds are Broadway, Pontiac Trail, Division, Plymouth. And then we've also talked about Traver because there's a school over in that area. And I'll get into some of these improvement alternatives. So speed management recommendations on Pontiac Trail. We just hit on a bunch of the locations where we recommended roundabouts. Now, roundabouts are good because what it does, it makes all the traffic entering the intersection come down slow. If we went to mini roundabouts, they may even have to go slower than roundabouts you've seen. What this does, it allows them to slow down, be able to see the pedestrians. Bicyclists can either get into the traveled lane or get off onto a wider pathway. There are radar speed signs out on Pontiac Trail now. We've proposed some new locations or additional locations. Ann Arbor uses the gateway treatments, as you can see in the bottom right picture. We have some additional locations where we're recommending those. Moving over to Plymouth Road. So there are plans in place to narrow the lanes down on Plymouth Road and provide a southwestbound bike lane on street. This proposed cross-section will still have 5 lanes. What we're looking at is potential to put in a raised median where possible. Through discussions with the public, it was noted there's a desire to have an additional bus stop. So we looked at adding a crossing in this area. Again, this stretch of road, radar speed signs would be a good option here. On Traver today has some speed humps on it. We noted some additional areas where we could add speed humps. Down near the school, there's a stretch of Traver that has no sidewalk on either side. So we were looking at ways that we could get sidewalk or pathway in this area. And one option that came up and was discussed a number of times is possibly narrowing the road in this stretch, which would get rid of parking, at least on one side of the road, and then use this extra space to put in a walkway through that stretch. That way you wouldn't have to tear up people's yards to build any new sidewalk because the grades are not the best in that area. Division at Broadway, we looked at adding bump outs. That gives you the feel of narrow lanes and slows down traffic. Adding radar speed signs as you're coming up Division into the busy area of intersections. And then adding a radar speed sign as you're coming southwest across the bridge as well. Okay, pedestrian recommendations. We've looked at where we could add rectangular rapid flashing beacons, high emphasis crossings, ramp upgrades, countdown signal heads, and install pedestrian warning signs. So this map just shows some of the areas that we found through all the different studies we did on the project. We had warning signs. Also was noted gaps in sidewalk throughout the area and where we could potentially fill in sidewalk gaps. I think some of this has been filled in since we created the exhibit. Other pedestrian improvements, street trees, increased green belt, lighting, school improvements, speed management. All right, bicycle recommendations. So we saw where there were bike lanes blocked by putting traffic out into the road, different obstructions, narrower boardwalk than desired for cyclists, and recommendations for a bike boulevard, and then bike lanes adjacent to parking. So these were the areas noted. We do have a greater discussion on all of this in the report, but this is just to give you an idea of some of the things we're looking at. One specific recommendation, Cascades access from the southeast side of Broadway, looking to build a ramp down to the water, taking pedestrians under the street instead of crossing them at grade, and then they could go up to the Cascades. Transit recommendations. This exhibit here shows a potential new bus route along Barton that would hop onto M14 and then get you down onto Main Street. That's currently lacking for the Lower Town area. Some other thoughts on transit, increased frequency and reliability. There are a number of locations to upgrade bus stops for ADA compliance. Look to park and ride opportunities. Some stuff for motor vehicles. A lot of this came out through our road safety audit, just improving pavement markings, specific sign upgrades, guardrail that might need fixed, EV charging stations. A lot of different things came out through all the steps in the study. Driver technologies, changeable message signs, speed management and warning systems, and then transportation system management and demand management. Some of the ways that you can do this transportation demand and system management, by improving the non-motorized facilities, you're going to get more people that will walk or bike than use their vehicles, improve the transit, ride sharing programs, flexible work times, and then we've also shown some park and ride lots where we could add additional park and ride lots potentially. And that is a lot of slides and hopefully a short amount of time. So I'm open to questions.
Thank you. Yeah, if you could unshare the screen, and then it's a bit easier to see folks for Q&A. So I'll just call on people as I see hands raised. Commissioner Hadamaki.
Thank you. I just wanted to register some concern about the proposed roundabout at Barton and Pontiac, given its location right next to the STEAM school, and just the common belief that pedestrian roundabouts handling pedestrians, especially younger kids, it just raises some red flags for me. It's just a block or two away from the school, and we'll get a lot of school pedestrian, little kid traffic on a rush hour kind of thoroughfare. So just registering concern. I'm not saying it's impossible to make it happen safely, but that's kind of a known difficulty with roundabouts. I'm not sure if you guys had put thought into that already or have designed solutions to make parents feel better about sending their kids across lanes of maybe you have like a little island 2 or 3 feet where you're playing Frogger to get across and then hop across again. Yeah, I'm not sure if you guys have put any thought into that particular location of a roundabout.
I'll just say we have had a lot of discussion on it. We have heard a lot of concerns on it. We have had city agreeing to not support that recommendation. We have pulled, I'll let Steve Deering speak a little bit, but we have pulled a lot of research on the safety of roundabouts compared to the signalized intersections. And I'm not sure, Steve, if any of that had school crossing locations identified in it.
The first thing I want to mention is that if there was to be a roundabout here, then it would have splitter islands that would act as the refuge point for a pedestrian trying to get across the road, so that it would split up their journey, so it'd be like crossing 2 one-way roads as opposed to dealing with 2-way traffic all in one fell swoop. There have been, I'm not aware of any studies that have been performed that are specific to the topic of roundabouts at schools. But there have been a very large number of roundabouts that have been put in at schools to function as school crossings. And that represents schools from grade levels elementary all the way up to high school. So if you desire, I can, there's a database that's available, and I can query that database and provide the results to the city staff in terms of the number and the types of roundabouts that have been put in for different grade level of schools.
Thanks. Councilmember Briggs.
Yeah, thanks. I also had questions. Specifically, sounds like staff and OHM came to different conclusions around the merits of this crosswalk. I'd like to hear what those, where the differences lie.
Luke might have something to say, but what we found is that because there's so much new development to the north of here, whether we put in a signal or a roundabout in the future, traffic's it's going to fail in the morning and in the evening. So Luke and the city said, we don't want to support a recommendation that really doesn't solve all the problems. That's going to be a problem down the road. What we know here is there's houses on all 4 corners. Right of way is limited. You can't build, unless you bought all the property in that area, you can't really build your way out of it with more lanes or bigger roundabout, additional turn lanes, stuff like that. Luke, I don't want to totally speak for you, but.
Right. It's a challenging intersection. I think the difference in opinion kind of reflects the difficulty of the problem we're dealing that will be upon this intersection. From traffic volume forecast, we're looking at in the neighborhood of increasing for each hour additional 400 cars an hour on the north leg of the intersection. So that's a huge burden for not creating traffic delay. So then different form of intersection was explored, and staff's most concern for roundabout or compact urban roundabout is the sheer distance or how close those houses are from the intersection. We're trying to find if there's any other examples where a roundabout can function well with nearby residents. And we did not find any other example where there has been a successful installation, not even like in one corner of the intersection, let alone for this location we have 4 homes. And as to the pedestrian treatment, I guess we do not really have any strong support saying that roundabout is a preferred treatment for intersections near school. However, like Steve mentioned, crossing one lane at one time, that's better than having a dual threat. But that is not in my mind to compare with an existing signalized treatment for the intersection. So I guess from that perspective, I guess we're not seeing enough technical support for recommending this alternative.
Thanks. That's helpful to understand. I also share the concerns about its proximity to the STEAM school as somebody who walked 40 years ago from Long Pontiac Trail to then Northside Elementary School. I know it's a lot more common at that point to walk alone than it is today, but I can imagine it being difficult to navigate that roundabout, especially with the traffic off of Barton. So if there's more data that's provided on this, I would be interested not only in knowing the proximity to schools, but actually if those roundabouts are being placed in communities that are considered walkable, if they are in communities that prioritize those values, I guess, not just kind of the movement of automobiles around it. Question on Pontiac Trail. It looked like there was enhanced pedestrian treatments down Pontiac Trail, and some with rectangular rapid flashing beacons, but I wasn't quite sure where those the rectangular rapid flashing beacons were going to be, if that was from Barton Drive towards which direction that was. And what I've noticed on Pontiac or on Plymouth is it seems that those RFBs are actually providing some opportunity. They're obviously largely beneficial to pedestrians crossing, but I also noticed that they provide gaps in traffic when they're activated for motorists trying to get out of driveways. And I'm curious if that was something that came up in the discussions, or if there's any truth in that, in my observations there, if they might also be a traffic management tool, I guess.
Well, those were included as part of our speed management recommendations. We have an exhibit that shows where we were proposing all of them, and I don't have it handy. Steve, do you know specifically where you were recommending those? I can try to pull up a different exhibit.
Yeah, while they look for that, I think the overall exact location, that's something they have been working on recently. There's one location that is going in for sure, that is Pontiac Trail and St. Regis. There'll be a new crosswalk there with lighting and RFB treatment. And as to the effect of creating gaps in traffic flow, that's definitely happening, and it is I guess a side product by equipping the crosswalk with RFB. We're not really seeking the installation of RFB to create traffic gaps. It's just for treatment of crosswalk locations, if RFB is a good fit, then we'll have the side benefit of creating traffic gaps. Like one specific intersection is where Arrowwood exits the neighborhood. Residents are having a hard time during traffic peak to get onto Pontiac Trail. That was a concern voiced pretty early in the process. So we specifically collected traffic counts there and did signal warrant analysis. But the result was showing that that particular intersection did not meet the signal warrant. So I guess we'll have an overall look when the consultant is ready for the final RFB locations to see whether there will be like one location nearby Arrowwood to help ease that problem.
Okay, I guess I would be interested in seeing if there's multiple purposes that RFBs can serve. I mean, the traffic is pretty, obviously speeds are a concern along Pontiac Trail, so I'm curious why our crosswalk design guidelines wouldn't call for an RFB there, and if they have the an additional benefit of making it easier for folks to get out of driveways, which seems to be a concern for residents along that area. That seems like an extra bonus reason to throw them in. And then finally, just real quickly, you said that the study around M14, the recommendations around that had been, there aren't recommendations in the report, kind of deferring to the MDOT's study on this one. And I'm just wondering if it might be beneficial for the city to have its own set of recommendations, because I know we don't always come to the same conclusions as MDOT. And so I'd be curious to hear more about why our study does not have recommendations there.
Right. In addition to knowing there's a larger MDOT study going on, we did communicate the findings at the off-ramp and on-ramp intersection to MDOT. And through the discussion, we discovered other considerations and concerns. It's I guess fairly straightforward to identify that the traffic signal warrant is met for that particular intersection, but the installation of a signal may have negative impact on how the interchange would function. With stop sign control, the traffic flow headed from Barton onto the on-ramp is somewhat metered in a sense. So that actually is more desired than a traffic signal, which would release a series of vehicles at one time to the on-ramp, and that would create, I guess, harder issues for the currently stop-controlled on-ramp, how that operates. And also with both directions on Barton Drive at the intersection, they both have just one travel lane. There is some determination as to how many travel lanes will be needed for traffic signal to function well.
Thanks. Commissioner Parsons, and then I think we're going to have to wrap this one up since we're trying to beat sunset.
Thank you, and I appreciate it. And I think this is more just some comments for public record, and maybe there's sort of some follow-up that could come out of it. I've received a lot of personal communications about the Lower Town study, and so I sort of want to encapsulate some of that just for the public record. The roundabouts are well received in this town, and I think that they are interesting and great solutions for a lot of things. People have serious concerns about the spaces in between these roundabouts. Just in this discussion tonight, it was acknowledged that coming down the Division Hill, for instance, is a speed problem. And our solution is so far to put RFBs in a more visible location. How do we reduce speed? How do we embrace Vision Zero concepts? The same goes for Pontiac, and certainly the same goes for Plymouth. And I'm just not sure that we're embracing Vision Zero concepts when it comes to this plan. I do want to say that I acknowledge and I certainly appreciate that there are incredibly difficult intersections with major conflict zones in all of these areas. But I feel like level of service, and others have communicated this, level of service is the driving factor here, not livability, not crossability. I just want to quote real quick and just so it sinks in. Providing a refuge island for pedestrians trying to cross the road was discussed about the benefits of roundabouts. That's incredibly hostile sort of language for pedestrians. We're not building things for pedestrians and cyclists. It's sort of an aftermath of dealing with level of service through these corridors. So I just want to say those things so they're in that public record, and maybe to ask a specific question: how much emphasis was placed on Vision Zero throughout the entire corridor? And how can we reduce speeds based on those Vision Zero principles? And I thank you for your efforts and look forward to the comment.
Steve, you want to take that, or would you like me to start? You're muted.
Go ahead, Steve.
Okay. We were very much aware of the city's Vision Zero policies. And when we started working our way through different alternative configurations for some of the more problematic intersections, one of the things that we looked at were conflict points. And specifically at that junction, that very complex and confusing junction of Broadway and Division and Beeks and Summit and Cary and Detroit and High Street. It's a very, very complicated location. It has a lot of conflict points, many of which involve pedestrians and pedestrian crossings. And it's already designed as a relatively high speed kind of an environment. Mr. Loveland already showed you some of the quick and easy in terms of trying to take a travel lane, reduce it to a parking lane, extend the on-street bike lane so it connects to the walk that gets you onto the bridge and over the railroad and the river. That's relatively easy to do within the confines of the existing geometry. But when we looked at the alternatives that you could do, none of which would be cheap, but we were looking at reducing conflicts because conflicts are a surrogate for crashes. And we've came up with alternatives that reduce the number of conflicts anywhere from 40 to 60% below what it exists today, which would be a marked improvement of safety. More importantly, though, when you start getting rid of some of these conflicts, because you're going to be not providing full access to all of these side streets, you have room to take the main road of northbound Division as it makes its what is now a sweeping curve onto Broadway. You will have room to use a different geometry that would tighten that up and by geometry force the traffic to go slower. But again, within the scope of our study, we identified a bunch of alternatives. There's trade-offs with every single one of them in terms of changing how people are accessing Depot Street and the other side streets. And it would revolve around the city needing to make a fundamental policy decision that rebuilding that junction with the goal of using the geometry of the junction to slow down traffic. But again, there's all these trade-offs in terms of changing access. So it's a very complicated discussion to be had.
Molly, I raised my hand just because I want to respond a little bit. I appreciate that very much. I do want to push back a little bit, though. It was acknowledged that, and you just said it a moment ago, look, the downhill portion of Division is designed as a high-speed corridor. When cars go through the initial bottlenecks up top and they gain speed because it feels like a freeway on-ramp. And so what we're doing with this intersection that is incredibly complicated, I could totally acknowledge it's incredibly complicated, but we're bringing cars hurtling down a road into this complicated intersection. And we're not asking, I think, a basic question, which is complicated intersections aren't dangerous. It's the speed of which vehicles travel through them. And so I think that's sort of a nutshell of some of my concerns here. We have cars in this current plan going fast on major corridors until they hit a roundabout or an intersection or whatever you want to call it. We can minimize all sorts of conflict zones. I mean, it sounds like we're building a freeway. Minimize conflict zones so cars can go through fast, and we'll try to figure out how pedestrians can cross. I don't think that's what the values of Ann Arbor folks have when it comes to these intersections. They want to see Vision Zero as the principal guiding point. And according to Vision Zero, nothing over 25 miles an hour is okay through this corridor. I just want to put that in the public record so folks understand where this perspective is coming from, not only from myself, but from others reacting to the study. I do truly appreciate the effort and the complications. I mean, I can't reiterate enough how complicated a lot of these intersections are. They are. There's 5 of them. There's railroad crossings, the whole bit. But Vision Zero, I think, needs to guide what we do moving forward, more than level of service. I'll end it at that. Thanks everybody. Thanks, Molly, for the time.
Thank you. I'm going to make one comment that I think builds on what Commissioner Parsons was saying, which is that I heard throughout this presentation and through the whole Lower Town area concerns about increasing numbers of cars over time and the level of service for there's going to be new housing and therefore there are going to be more cars. And I'm really curious about why none of these plans seem to really go hard on facilitating other modes of transportation and making them more attractive so that we don't ever get to that car problem, because we have buses that have priority and it's much more attractive to take a bus. I appreciate that there's the proposal of a new bus line, but if that bus is stuck in the traffic everyone else is stuck in, it's not going to be very attractive to use that bus. And so I related to the concerns specifically about speed. I'm concerned about just the appeal and attractiveness of moving through this space outside of a car. It doesn't sound fun. Last year during the Healthy Streets program, drivers really hated that bike lane on Division, but bikers and pedestrians loved it. And I don't see that kind of thought, those kinds of needs in this plan. So that's not a question. That's just a comment. And I know we need to keep moving, but thank you for the detail on this plan. I like Commissioner Parsons, I recognize that it's complex, and I also recognize that you have some rather outspoken neighbors pushing pretty hard for car priority, and this is my moment to push back on that. So thank you very much. Next up, we are going to have our staff report and updates from Commissioner Hess.
And Molly, can I chime in and make a quick suggestion? We are at 7:50 in the meeting, and we do still have a final presentation that is tucked at the very end from Dr. Sayer. And to honor his time, if we can jump straight to that and handle all communication items by email, that would be my suggestion. If there are questions on the staff report, please email Raymond. If there are liaison reports, please email me.
Let's do that.
But this will require that we run a little past 8. We had allocated 30 minutes for Dr. Sayer. So if the commission's in agreement to hold on, we'll ask to still have that presentation tonight. Otherwise, we would need to work on rescheduling with Dr. Sayer.
How are folks doing? All right, let's give it a try. I might have to go invisible and do some bedtime, but let's see what we can do.
All right, over to you, Dr. Sayer. Thanks for joining us from the University of Michigan Transportation Research Institute.
Good evening. Put this in presentation mode. Appreciate the time this evening. I hope you find this informative. Really just want to kind of give folks an update on some of the more recent projects we've been doing here in Ann Arbor. These are projects really that are tied exclusively to the Transportation Research Institute, but there are other projects ongoing with other faculty throughout the university. First, I want to start by acknowledging city staff that we've been working with now extensively. Started working with Craig Hupy more than 10 years ago. Also, Steve Dolan and his crew at Logistics, Transportation, and Parking, and then folks in the community as well. Kamal Dashi at Spark, AAATA, AAPS, and of course residents that live in the community that allow us to instrument their vehicles with connected vehicle technology. So we first launched our connected vehicle environment in August of 2012. And that morphed into a different project, the name of which the federal government chose. That was Ann Arbor Connected Vehicle Test Environment. When we no longer were getting federal funding and we were funded through MCity and other means, we just called it the Ann Arbor Connected Environment. Moving forward, we will have a kickoff later this year of another federally funded project that I'll mention briefly, and that's called the Smart Intersection Project. So we really have a continuation of the connected vehicle environment in Ann Arbor since we started deploying in early 2012. Just to give you a sense, this is a pretty extensive list of projects. As you can see from the amounts of dollars that are being spent on it, there's a total investment of effectively $70 million. Now, a lot of that goes to purchase equipment that goes in people's personal vehicles and also to pay people to participate. But nevertheless, it has been a boost to the local economy. What we have today in the connected environment in terms of infrastructure is we have 75 what are called roadside units. And 70 of these are located essentially at intersections, pedestrian crosswalks, 2 curve speed warning sites, and 1 roundabout. These roadside units collect information from vehicles that are broadcasting wireless signals, and they also broadcast out signals of their own. So we can broadcast out the signal phase and timing of the traffic signal. We can also broadcast out, as I'll explain in a minute, the fact that a pedestrian has pressed the button on a rapid flashing beacon. One of the studies we completed recently was looking at 4 crosswalks along Plymouth Road, and specifically looking at what effect we might have on the likelihood of a vehicle slowing down if they received a warning inside of their vehicle, rather than just relying on them being able to visually see the beacon or the hawk signal. So as mentioned, 4 mid-block crosswalks. We were broadcasting these wireless signals called personal safety messages whenever the crosswalk button was pressed. And here's an example of one that's located on Plymouth Road, close to the fire station located on North Campus. I will say that one of the things we struggled with when this data was being collected in 2020 was there weren't a lot of pedestrians out walking around. And in fact, traffic in general was probably down, although the city would have a better sense of that than I would. Highlighted in the red circle is a camera. This is a GridSmart camera. This is a system that the city has been using elsewhere at other intersections. That's what we are using to actually detect the presence of a pedestrian. And then the wireless radio that's broadcasting signals to vehicles that are equipped. And then we've got equipment in the traffic control box. And here we see one of the equipped vehicles and a pedestrian. So quickly, some of the findings, we investigated the accuracy and kind of limitations of this pedestrian detection system. It employed a pretty coarse image-based detection. We found it was pretty effective when settings were properly tuned, but it took a lot of fine tuning. We looked also at the actual driver behavior, the people who had our equipped vehicles. And what we saw was that, in fact, drivers were stopping at crosswalks sooner. It wasn't a significant effect, but it was nevertheless safer. It was in the direction we would like to see it. Part of this is quite frankly due to the sample size. It's given the issues we had with COVID, and we weren't getting the pedestrians crossing Plymouth Road from apartments complexes, for example, on the north side, going to North Campus, that we would have under normal circumstances, or even we'd expect to see today. But again, the results are in the correct direction. We also have a roundabout project taking place on the south side of town, down by Costco, so State and Ellsworth. This has actually been a problematic roundabout for crashes. It's 14th worst intersection in the state. It's complicated relative to most roundabouts in that it's 2 lanes. So what we're really focusing on in this roundabout is collecting data and trying to figure out how these conflicts are being generated. And we're doing a lot of different infrastructure-based sensing, as well as then prediction of where vehicles will be heading. But also we're looking at detecting and predicting the paths of pedestrians and bicyclists at this location. Again, in the photo on the left, you'll see there's another grid smart system up there. Below that are radar and LiDAR based systems. We're doing a lot of powerful computation at the intersection. And so we have equipment again housed in the traffic control cabinet. But right now what we've seen is pretty robust performance. And we really don't have any security concerns in terms of, interfering certainly with the city's network. If I can get this to run, I will be able to show you. Oh boy. All right, there's a video, and oh, here we go. So this just gives you an example of, this is a thermal image, actually. And rather than a standard video image, and we're able to actually track vehicles as they operate in the roundabout. So taking this kind of information and developing predictive algorithms, we can help better understand where the conflicts are occurring. We don't have a lot of pedestrian bicycle data for this intersection, just simply due to the fact that from what we've seen thus far is just not a lot of that kind of traffic. I mentioned earlier the final project that'll be starting up yet this fall, that being the Smart Intersections project. Here we're deploying smart intersections with a lot of the same kinds of equipment that I just showed you for the roundabout: radar, LiDAR, thermal imaging, as well as some conventional quote unquote off the shelf products like a grid smart camera. Here again, though, we're going to be doing wireless communication between vehicles and the infrastructure. It's 21 intersections where we'll be doing things, broadcasting proxy, we call basic safety messages. So even if there is a vehicle that doesn't have wireless equipment on it, the image processing can detect vehicles and will generate a pseudo message to represent that vehicle. What that does essentially is that instead of having 2 or 3% of the vehicles equipped in the environment, it creates a situation where all of the vehicles are equipped. And it's not just the vehicles, it's also the pedestrians and the bicyclists. And so this is a significant advancement from what we've been doing for the better part of the last 10 years. And, we'll be working closely with city, develop implementation guide. And, really what we want to do in the long term is, be able to provide the community with a self-sustainable, connected and automated vehicle ecosystem. Just quickly, so you have a sense of some of the partners, some pretty big names: Ford, Qualcomm, Toyota, obviously the city, and companies like Econolite and WSP are highly recognized, NITRS recognized names in the transportation infrastructure community. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip this next slide. But moving forward, what we'd really like to start focusing our projects on are those that demonstrate that, projects with demonstrated needs in the community. I mean, obviously, we know that pedestrian safety is key, and the work we did on Plymouth Road, we realize is important. We want to do more projects along those lines. We're also exploring, broadening our footprint into other communities, simply due to the fact that other communities have different kinds of problems that need to be addressed, and then potentially different solutions. But we're increasingly focusing, our research on addressing mobility and accessibility challenges, particularly things relative to mobility equity. We want to make sure that the things that we deploy aren't just benefiting the rich or just benefiting vehicle drivers, but benefiting all road users in the community. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. It's not letting me stop share.
Oh, you stopped.
Oh, I did. Okay.
All right.
My screen is still showing it as being up, but okay.
All right, I can see what I need to see, but thanks for that. My very first Transportation Commission meeting had a presentation on the connected test environment, so I'm excited to see how things have advanced since then. We are tight on time, but I do want to make sure that we can take a couple of questions, so we'll start with Commissioner Boland.
Hi, thanks for that. I'm going to allude back to Commissioner Kleiman's comment earlier about the need to make buses as appealing as possible. And one of the things that I've been hoping to see is signal prioritization to buses to help them run on time, that sort of thing. Is there any interest in UMTRI in that sort of thing?
Yeah, actually, there's a great deal of interest. The slide that I skipped does list transit signal prioritization, also emergency vehicle signal preemption. In general, we're trying to improve traffic flow. One of our faculty is doing a great deal of work with, when you can understand all the traffic that's out there, you can do a much better job at dynamically changing signal phase and timing to accommodate, the changes in traffic volume.
Great, thank you so much.
Councilmember Briggs.
Thanks for the presentation. It was great to hear more about this, and also to see kind of where your priorities are in terms of moving forward. And obviously, we have our new transportation plan, which outlines a lot where our priorities are. I'm sure staff's able to hone that in as to where there might be good partnerships. But curious around pedestrian safety, if you're planning on expanding some of that work to other portions of our city, and also to kind of studying, interactions outside of crosswalks as well.
So we have done interactions outside of crosswalks, not just with pedestrians, but also bicyclists. We have a lot of naturalistic driving data that includes camera images from inside of a resident's vehicle. And so we're able to take that data, which actually those cameras have automatic pedestrian bicyclist detection built into them. So we're able to take that data and understand kind of the relationship, what are the potential conflicts that are occurring. We don't have enough of that data to really, say there's one particular part of town that has more conflicts than others, but we have enough to help us understand the types of conflicts that are occurring. We would be thrilled to be able to deploy, more pedestrian safety technologies across town. We rely almost exclusively on federal grants and contracts, and so therein lies kind of the challenge for us. We're limited by how much the federal government will give us.
Commissioner Parsons.
I appreciate it. Thanks. I'll try to keep it short, and super interesting presentation. Super interesting what you guys are doing. It's super cool to see. I don't want to sound like a Luddite when I ask this question, but a lot of times technological advances in automobiles are sort of a way around deficiencies in planning or unsafe roadways. I'm just curious. We've been watching this develop now for a couple of years. And this Transportation Commission is interested in current and future sort of mitigations when it comes to safety. Do you have a roundabout figure of years that we can see some of these making a significant impact, like 50% of cars are going to be, employing these safety measures, or more, that kind of thing? Sorry to get sci-fi on it. I'm super curious and can follow up elsewhere.
Sure. I can say, for those of you who've heard about the CAVNU project, which is a subsidiary of Sidewalk Infrastructure Partners, which is a subsidiary of Google, is to develop a connected and automated vehicle corridor from downtown Detroit to Ann Arbor. I listened to a presentation of their chief technology officer today. They're really pushing hard to get private financing to deploy more of this connected vehicle technology. But I will say that, the new technology of creating the proxy basic safety messages, in other words, not requiring a vehicle or a pedestrian or bicyclist to have equipment on board, that's just a game changer, right? Because now we're not reliant on vehicle manufacturers or the rate at which people are purchasing new vehicles. So it's very much in the development phase, though. I mean, this is first time it's really been deployed.
I have one question. Give me 1 second. You mentioned that you're thinking about issues around equity and accessibility for all road users. And I'm curious what that means, like in practice on the ground. What kinds of assessments are you doing? How are you evaluating the potential impact of this work on all members of the community?
Yes. So when I say that we're, going in that direction, it's more about looking at parts of our broader community that are underserved in terms of mobility. Either, there's mass transit, but people have to walk a half a mile or a mile to get to that bus stop, or maybe there aren't enough buses. So we're really looking at micro transit and micro mobility, alternative ways to help people get towards mass transit. These could be scooters, e-bikes, small buses that operate in an underserved community to help facilitate use of transit. But it could also mean other types of programs like vehicle sharing in communities. And we've talked to Toyota actually about that, about being able to station an electrical vehicle in an underserved community that could be used by a variety of people.
Thanks. All right. In the interest of time, I'm going to wrap us up. But, as if other folks have questions, I hope we can still reach out to you. And thank you so much for taking the time and for bearing with us this evening. So I think we've decided we're going to have all communications and stuff happen electronically in order to wrap things up. So if there are no objections, I'm going to adjourn this evening's meeting. Pausing to look for objections. All right. Thank you all so much. I wish an easy fast to those of you who may be fasting. And yeah, thanks. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Meeting is adjourned.
Have a good one. Bye.